My name is Grant. I'm your host here today. Can I begin our time together, our exciting time together, where we get to go somewhere new, hopefully today, and have some time of learning and sharing. On behalf of Deep Collaboration webinar and the Collaboration for Impact, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and the custodians of the land in which we live, work and travel. We acknowledge that our sovereignty, the sovereignty of those lands have never been ceded, and we pay our attention, respect to elders, both past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the contributions and sacrifices those elders have made to better our communities and our future. So folks, you all come from a particular place here to share from where you're from, but all of you have made the choice to be here for different reasons. And for that, I want to acknowledge your ancestors as well. We didn't select all of the people in our ancestry, but I want to acknowledge your ancestors that have shaped you and passed on values to you to want to be in a conversation like this. So I want to begin by naming them and remembering them in your consciousness today. Now, we're going to talk about our purpose today. We're here primarily to address this conversation of the lost conversation that repeatedly emerges. This time of the year, we hit that time where people start talking about changing the date, and the whole Australia Day discourse. The purpose here today is to navigate this topic through a deep collaboration framework, and to do it in a way that we hopefully go someplace new. I'm going to introduce to you and hand over now to Virginia and Mark Yettica-Paulson to talk a little bit about collaboration for impact as an organisation.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's wonderful to see so many people here. I think we have 113 people here so far and more coming. So my name is Virginia Goff and I am Collaboration for Impact's Learning Manager. I'm joining you from Wurundjeri land today. Many of you will know CFI based on the roles we play in making change. For those of you who are new to Collaboration for Impact, let me briefly explain who we are and why we are hosting this important event today. Collaboration for Impact is a not-for-profit organisation. We work across Australia and internationally. Our vision is for an inclusive and equitable society where people, place and planet thrive. Our purpose is to build an influential movement of people who are equipped to shift the conditions holding complex problems in place. Our role is to build the capacity of others. We at CFI are seeking large-scale impact, so better outcomes for whole groups of people. We do this by walking beside people closest to the challenges over the long term, so that we can create the long-term change that we simply could not do alone. We take up roles as coaches, facilitators, trainers, and often advisors, brokers and critical friends. And we're currently playing this role with 40+ communities and initiatives across Australia. So why this webinar? As part of our systems change work, one of the conditions CFI has chosen specifically to work on in Australia is very much about how we change the relationship between First Nations Australians and other Australians so that we can reconcile the colonial history we have and move forward as a country. So let me just pass on to Mark, our CFI's Deep Collaboration Practice Lead, who will further explain our work in this space.
Thanks, Virginia, and thanks, Grant, for bringing us in. The work of deep collaboration is part of Collaboration for Impact. And I guess the key thing there is that those 2 points that Virginia raised. First of all, that one of our purposes as an organisation is to build an influential movement of people who are equipped to shift the conditions. Now, can you imagine what that would feel like for First Nations people if we have a movement of people who are equipped to shift the conditions that face us as First Nations people? That's transformational. It's the kind of things that will see a generational shift for us. So Collaboration for Impact exists to create this movement of people, and the choice to focus on how we develop awareness and skills and the energy and effort to work on the collaborative space between First Nations and others is a cornerstone of this work, because everywhere we work on this beautiful land is on the land of First Nations people. Some of it's recognised, some of it has not been recognised, and we are in the process of continually trying to come to terms with that. And if we just have a very quick look at the generation past and the generation coming, we'll see that we have an opportunity to shift that language and shift those conditions. And so this webinar is about trying to create some of that conversational space to do that. Thanks. And I'm going to hand back to you now, Grant, to take us on the next part of our journey.
Thanks, Mark. There's a number of ways we could introduce ourselves this morning, and I'm going to invite you, as some of you have, there are people talking about in the chat, naming where they come from, and they're just, I noticed a lot of mob here from Wurundjeri country and a Wabikal mob, but there's also another way you can share where you're from. We have a function on your Zoom. If you go up to view options right up the top and click on that, you will see a thing called annotate as it comes down. If you click on annotate, and you can go to a thing called stamp. It's the fourth little tick thing along from the left. If you click on a star or heart, you can actually go to the place where you're speaking from now on the map and click it. And I'm going to have a crack at that. And in so doing, we get to see where everybody's talking from, or well, joining in from, and we get a visual picture of where we're coming from. Oh, wow, we've got mob coming in from the center too. That's awesome.
And if for whatever reason you make a mistake, just click on the undo part and then go again. And yeah, it doesn't matter if we've got more than 2 hearts.
Oh, we've got a little line there. Maybe undo that little scribble there, and unless you're drawing an arrow to where you are, but we'll see a lot of East Coast mob here. It's lovely to see you all here today, and to see the people and the communities you represent, as well as your organisations. The other exciting thing about that, it's good to know that there are a lot of us on a journey today, that we're not alone. We I think everybody's had a chance to do that. We might go to our next slide and just to talk about how we are going to do this conversation. We're going to do some housekeeping and framing of the conversation. We're having our panel conversation, but there's also places for people to reflect back as well in the chat process. So today isn't just a chalk and talk, but it's a way of speaking back. We are a large community here today, so there won't be the opportunity to dialogue in a deep way that would be nice if we were all in a conference centre. But hopefully there'll be a function in our journey today to be able to not only listen to some ideas, but to also reflect back through the chat function. Today is also being recorded, so it will be shared with you as well, so you'll be able to see and hear the journey we've made together, as well as the learnings we hope to go deeper in this conversations. Can we go to our next slide? So we have I want to acknowledge the many tech people that are supporting us for a Paroma from a collaboration for impact. I also want to acknowledge the many the staff that are behind the scenes that are pushing the buttons and letting folk in. They're making this day happen, and there's the team of folk making people like me functionable. We also wanted to say that when we capture the conversation, we're going to be using it in a way that helps us to hunt for knowledge, to go deeper and to be better as change agents, to do the sorts of things we need to do in our communities. So please use speaker view. Also, please use the chat function as well to engage. Can we go to our next slide, please, Paroma? So our chat room is a safe space. So we want to have all voices respected, and we want to encourage a healthy way to engage and even disagree. So there's not very many places where we can engage in a respectful way and hear the other. So we want to be able to do that in this place. So we invite you to be respectful in your behavior, and we don't want to get to the stage where we have to remove disrespectful behavior, but the aspiration is that we keep our comments succinct and on topic in a way that helps us to deepen and grow. And as the Warlpiri mob will say, we are going hunting for deep knowledge, and we're all on that journey together. So please post your questions and make a comment, and hopefully we'll be able to get better and stronger together. It's not a place to do marketing or self-promotion unless you're selling coffee on Quandamooka country, and then you can come to my house and drop that off. If you need technical support, contact Paroma directly, and she can help you out with that. Don't use the chat room for that, but find an alternate methods to try and contact CFI. We'll also have a function at the end for you to do feedback as well. So the chat process is not for that. We are wanting to go someplace deeper, someplace better, and that's the purpose of our journey today. And we invite you to bring your best selves and to put your best foot forward as we go on this journey together. So I want to introduce to you our esteemed panelists and our awesome people that are with us today. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce you to them and what they are contributing. And so we have Mr. Mark Yettica-Paulson, and we have Dr. Josephine Bourne, and we have Liz Skelton from Collaboration for Impact on Bunjalung country, for that matter too. Good country down that way. So panelists, I'm going to ask you to probably just to introduce who you are, the country that you're in, and what's your relationship to this mob called CFI, and what you'll be bringing to this conversation today. And can I turn to you, Mark, to kick off with you?
Thanks, Grant. Hi, folks. Mark Yettica-Paulson. I'm the practice lead for deep collaboration at Collaboration for Impact. And yes, you may be able to tell by now, I'm also Grant's younger brother. So the Paulson is connection, and yes, we do look the same, but luckily we wore different coloured shirts. You know how it is when brothers always get dressed the same. But anyway, so just wanted to make sure that you all knew, in case you were wondering. The focus that I want to bring is at Deep Collaboration, we're all about trying to create those conversation spaces that we can address lost conversations that seem to slip through our fingers, or we find ourselves going, I wish we had more time to talk on that, or we never get around to speak about that. And in many ways, the January 26th is almost like the intense fitness program for lost conversations in Australia to do with First Nations and other Australians. It is one of those things that we know comes around, and we either prepare for the festivities and the pride, and we want to push that forward and celebrate the wonderful country that we are, or we come to and we start to approach it and we go, oh no, here we go again. I don't know what to do here. I'm not sure how to feel about this. I don't know. I feel challenged by it. Or we may be approaching this and going, yeah, this is not good for me. I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel happy. It brings up, it's a trauma trigger for me. And you may also be going, I don't want to be part of it. I don't want to be even, but you probably wouldn't be on this webinar if you weren't of that last category. But we know people who are like that. So we hope that in this conversation, and what I'll be trying to bring is from a deep collaboration lens, we want to focus on how by addressing the lost conversation for January 26, we might be able to bring some insight and the practice of deep collaboration that's going to help us with the leverage on many of the big conversations for 2022, treaties, constitutional reform, truth-telling, and even some other related conversations that are huge, that are based on values change, like what we're doing with climate change, how we're dealing with other crises that are affecting us as a country. But for this conversation, it's about how we look at January 26th and how that tells us something about First Nations and others working together. That's my little platform. Thanks, Ray.
Thank you, Mark, for demonstrating how you're connected and for drawing attention to the fact that I am older. I appreciate it very much. I want to also acknowledge my dear friend, Josephine Bourne, my sister from another mister. And it's an honor to have you join us this morning, my friend. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you're connected to this conversation. What brings you here?
Thank you, Grant. So I was born in Townsville on the Wulgurukaba and Bindal country, and I grew up here, and I'm here right now today. So I stayed connected even though I've travelled down the east coast of Australia doing work. And in my travels, I have had the opportunity to first work with Mark, which was 20 years ago now. And we met through leadership work when we were all much younger. And then Grant 15 years ago through the Foundation for Young Australians, and we were doing change work and helping young people or supporting them to build the skills to do this change work that is still in front of all of us. And then I met Liz a little time later through some more leadership work that we were doing, thinking about what does it mean to be an emerging leader. And I remember elder stateswoman, Aboriginal elder stateswoman, telling me that she thought we should stop thinking about being emerging and start realizing that we just are. So we are doing the work and we are leaders. And so I've never forgotten that. So we still use the word emerging, but we know that we're doing it. So just happy to be here continuing these conversations. My thinking has always been around leadership, but also vehicles, like whether we call them, governance mechanisms, but vehicles, whether they're organizations, whether they're committees. A lot of you guys use different ways of engaging people to drive things. And so my interest has been, how do we create vehicles that can that can take us to where we're wanting to go, for that change that we want to make, for that vision that we share. So I guess I'm going to talk about those kind of things, particularly in relation to, say, treaty making, and what does that mean for us now that, you know, a few states around the country are moving towards doing this work of treaty making.
Awesome. Fantastic, Josephine. Good to have you here with us. And my last esteemed colleague and my Scottish sister from another mister, Liz Skelton. Good to have you.
Thanks, Grant. I'm coming to this conversation, I guess, with a number of hats on. The main hat is my role in Collaboration for Impact, which is as director, co-founder, but also in the work that I do with Mark on deep collaboration. And as a Scottish Australian trying to do change making work in the Australian context. So I guess the different lenses I'm bringing to this today is that in the work that we do at CFI, we see that doing systems change work in Australia is social justice work, and that we can't do social justice work in Australia without addressing the impact of colonisation. So any of the complex issues that we're working on across the country, we see direct or indirect, visible or invisible influence of colonisation that's with us all the time. And I guess a few years ago, we saw that there was a choice, that do we actively engage in that to shift the conditions, or do we kind of do it incidentally or accidentally if it's being led by communities we're working with? And we made the decision and the choice to actively engage on how do we shift that, because we see them as being inextricably linked. We can't address complex change and bring about social justice unless we address this in the Australian context. And I guess what we're working on is how do we move it from being a choice to being actually part and parcel, that it's a necessity of doing systems change work in Australia, that we work with awareness of this. So I think I'll be bringing that lens, but also what I've learned and the mistakes that I've made and the work that Josephine referred to, and Mark and Grant, that we've done together, but the mistakes that we continue to make, and what is the work for non-Indigenous, for white Australians who are navigating in this, and how do we do our own work, but how do we also work together in collaboration? So a few different hats to bring to it today. Fantastic. But it's great to be here with so many people this year.
And encouraging to have such a number of people in the room with us, and a number of participants joining us on the journey. So Mark, there's a number of pattern behaviours that are often talked about, where Liz has spoken about systems change that require. Josephine's have spoken about vehicles to help us move someplace else. How do we become unstuck? What are the pattern behaviours that emerge that you've talked about and navigated in responding to the Australia Day dilemma dynamic? You're on mute, Mark, by the way.
That was a test run. So I'm glad you passed on that one. Great. Is it working now? Cool. Okay. No, what I was saying is that yeah, the first major breakthrough that we had in this conversation with First Nations and others, right? So let me just get real with this. Black fellas and white fellas in the same room with great intent and desire for change. And we found we were coming up with repeat behavior, repeat patterns. And we just called time out and said, what is going on here? And what we realized is that even as well developed as we are over a generation of trying to do this advocacy work, trying to push forward agendas, and now we've got allies and we're in the same room, we still found ourselves with predictable patterns that helped us to not get the work done. It was actually helping us to avoid having real conversations with each other. And so what we did with deep collaboration is that we have sought to now apply some of the other kind of facilitation tools, the other ways of understanding power, other ways of appreciating different dynamics and techniques of systems change and movement building, to start to identify, well, look, let's actually name some of these and do something with them, because they do turn up on any conversation to do with January 26, and they will turn up on all the conversations in February, March, April, May this year, as we go all the way through this year, trying to wrestle with how we elevate the work of state-based treaties, how we work on the things to do with constitutional reform, huge things, big things. But if we can't have a very base conversation with each other and realize that we're having these predictable or patterns of behavior that keep showing up, then we won't be able to do that negotiation of nation building. So one of them in particular, so we started to name a range of them, and I'll be very brief with this. We actually codified 5 of them, and we thought, okay, this would be a good way to talk about that. So we talked about things like the gatekeeping role that turns up. We've realized that, you know, we do gatekeeping as First Nations, but hey, they do gatekeeping as well. They're stopping us from getting there. You know, we realized that we create fantasy leaders and we think, oh, this leader will help us. If only we get them involved, it'll make everything go well. And they do fantasy leading as well, where they say, oh, I think you need this person, or you need that CEO or that chairperson, or you need that Indigenous leader. So we create, we dream up that sort of stuff. But we do other things like we have a critic role, we've got a culture card or race card kind of role as well. And we get stuck in polarized trenches. We talked a little bit about polarized trenches last year around this particular topic of January 26th. But Liz, I just wanted to see if I could connect with you as well with this, because culture card or race card was actually one of the big ones that we revealed that there's a reason why I play it as a First Nations person. You know, yes, because I want to make sure things are culturally safe, but I'll also play a culture card because it gives me power to stop conversations. And I just want to just dwell on this for a second, because it revealed why we need to create conversation spaces. Because I was playing this card and I just wanted to stop the conversation, but I never thought to ask or inquire or hear, how does it affect the white people in the room? And so we were able to elicit that conversation by staying in the room together. Liz, are you okay to just respond to that culture card, the race card, as it gets played?
So I think being on the receiving end of the culture card, and also I see and have played the culture card myself, but being on the receiving end of it, I think there's a common dynamic that starts to happen, which is often paralysis, that accusation of being culturally incompetent or getting it wrong or things not being culturally safe. It's kind of a stop card. It stops conversation together. And I think what generally happens is, as white people, we back away from it rather than lean into it to inquire. And there's a number of things going on there. And I think that part of it is that paralysis of, I've got it wrong, I'm going to create more damage. I don't have enough, I don't know what to do. But I think underlying it, and particularly in Australia, there's a real fear around that accusation of being racist. And that rather than being able to, and we see it as good or bad, you know, we're either good white people or we're racist white people. And we polarize into those binary positions, which really don't help us at those moments. Rather than seeing that actually we are all impacted by the history that we're in, where the kind of supremacy of a white viewpoint is at the heart of everything we do. So it's more a question of how, in what ways is that true, rather than having to defend. Because often what I see is we go into gatekeepers and we bring forward our credentials, which prove that we're not racist because we're doing all this work with First Nations people and others, so we can't possibly be racist, when actually we're all impacted by it. So I think part of this is being able to see ourselves on a continuum about how are we contributing to this? Not are we, because we will be. But that paralysis or that card often stops that until we're able to free ourselves from that role and move through it.
Mm. Liz, you've probably you're getting a lot of heads nodding in the conversation at the moment, saying, "Yeah, I see that," and I'm surprised the chat's not firing off at the moment. Josephine, Mark and Liz have sort of outlined some dynamics that they've seen in their facilitation and in the work that they do together. Have you seen these dynamics play out at the coalface in the community where you guys are?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I've pulled the culture card as well. I guess also I want to say that Mark knows what I'm going to say, that's why he's smiling, that there are legitimate times, I think, when we pull the culture card or the race card. But look, I'm in Townsville at the moment. We have a major issue here with young people stealing cars. Who knows why? But for fun, maybe boredom, I don't know. Maybe it's protest, maybe it's resistance. I don't know. But you know, there's a lot of the dialogue in the I've just become aware of in the last week, because my car was stolen, but returned in the same day. But I've now become aware that, yeah, people are saying, look, the culture card, the race card keeps being pulled, which is immobilizing us. We're not getting to that step of being able to work together. Sure, let's look at this situation, name what we have to name, certain parts of it, but it's just being at a stalemate, which of course all of us have been in those situations, whether you're working at the national level, state level, regional level, local level, neighborhood level, family level. Like, you know, it's the same dynamic there. And look, I mean, I guess I'm thinking maybe my car got stolen so I can be part of this dialogue here in Townsville, and see if we can push past the race card business or the culture card, and really get to, you know, saying, hey, these are our children, these children are ours, and they're part of the future, and, you know, all that kind of, those things that are just the facts. And I don't know how we're going to go, but I know many of you listening today, I mean, this has got to be familiar, very familiar stuff to you. But yeah, I think at this stage, I'm feeling a bit excited about the possibilities. So yeah, that's where I'm at the moment.
Thank you. Josephine, there's a lot of these symptoms that are talking up in the stuckness between black and white. In your community development experience, and as well as some of the leadership stuff that you've been involved in, is there a sense that conversations need to be held separately or together? How do you see them happening? This is about collaboration today. Are there some problems in trying to do things together in your thinking?
Sure. Yeah, I think definitely, and I think an observation that I made was, say, the reconciliation movement that started in the early 90s. You know, so Australia took a different approach to other countries. So, you know, I guess the truth telling that occurred to kick off our reconciliation process was, perhaps people might think it was the Redfern speech by Paul Keating, but that was a moment in time. You know, that was a prime minister. While it was significant, there was no systemic approach to truth-telling beginning reconciliation process. And I have to acknowledge that a lot of First Nations people also believe that really it's not reconciliation, it's conciliation. There hasn't really been a relationship, given that there wasn't any treaty, you know, and there's never been a serious consideration of doing treaty making with First Nations people in Australia.
Sure.
So, you know, those kind of those kind of things. I think that process brought in this moment of like a kumbaya moment, like, you know, like, let's all get together and like, you know, hold hands and love each other and everything. But we hadn't worked through any of the trauma. And that is that shared experience of being subjugated, all of us Australians, by the regime that was set up. So this construct of race was created around the turn of the century when the Constitution was written. These are all constructs, right? Social constructs. And we were born into thinking that is how it is here. And we've never really paused to interrogate, what do I think this way? What do I think that way? What does my generation do this? What does that generation do that? And I do think that there's spaces that are needed for different groups to do that thinking together. Sure. And sometimes I think we've experienced this, Liz, Grant and Mark, where maybe we've rushed in to dialogues with others and we haven't given each other time to kind of unpack things in a safe space where you can do it with your own people. And when I say own people, I'm not going to, because I don't know who people are to you, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be based on race. Your people could be quite diverse, but there is a need to have those conversations before coming then into a space where, you know, you are going to have to do the things that, you know, that Grant was saying, where we're having to listen to things that are really difficult to listen to because we don't agree with the way other people are seeing that stuff. But yeah, Grant, I do think there are times when we have to have dialogue with our people, whoever they are, before coming into a space with others to I guess, try to be, I don't know, sometimes it feels like you've got to steel yourself, you know, you got to really put that armor on before you go in. But I think it's helpful. Look, I've tried to do it in an organizational setting, and I got accused of separatism.
Okay.
That's very typical. It was really hard. It was really hard to, and it's really hard when you get new people come into your organization. So you might have been on a journey with your team, you know, for like 3 years. And so you're ready now to start like separating and having your own things and then coming together and having this practice of doing that. But then you've got new staff coming in who are like, oh, wow. This feels not good. Shouldn't we all just be together holding hands in silence? No, but anyway, yeah, that's my thinking at the moment.
Yeah, no, thanks, Josephine. Liz, this is an uncommon dynamics, is it? It's really easy to feel that sense of stuckness when people try to come together, and people often find, how do we break the habits of falling into old places and feeling stuck? I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the kind of signals that show up when people find themselves in these sticky places where they just feel like, oh, here we are again. Some of the dynamics that Josephine just described. What does that look like for you in your experience?
Yeah, I think this, in collaboration, or when we're working together, even on this question about January the 26th, you know, there's always a moment we come to in a conversation or a collaboration where we're on an edge. So, I mean, the language we use around it is that we get to that edge and we choose to go into it or not. And it's whether you kick people over the edge or you kiss them over the edge, I think is the choice we're often left with. There is, even in our one-on-one conversations, we know that around 26th of January, even raising the questions we're talking about today, there's a tendency to marginalize a faction who doesn't want to celebrate January the 26th, as opposed to engage in the conversation about what's going on. So, you know, we can marginalize people at those moments when we're on an edge. So I'd say nationally, obviously, we've been on an edge for a long time as a country around this. And we'll see certain behavior happening at that time. And I think the key one that we see is we see a critic role, that really whatever we say or however we come forward in this, either it's in myself, that it's a question of, who am I to step out and say this, which is one I know very well, working in this space, that we're walking into a space where we're on eggshells a lot of the time. So to really step into the authority and power, you've got to go, I'm going to do that, even though I'm scared, I'm going to get it wrong. And there will be a critic there, is really the work that I think we're all doing. But it's very easy at that point to resist the critique that's going to come, or the fear of getting it wrong, and go back to the trenches. And I think what we tend to see there is, we do need those trenches, like Josephine said. Those trenches can be really important. So we know when to go back to our comfort zone and regroup. In the work that we do, we see a lot of the time when we've deliberately created spaces, what we see is when First Nations people go into space together, there's almost always immediate relief to be away from, the others. And often, it's when we might be making stupid, dumb mistakes. And there's an instantly relief, but then there's also a really strong sense of shared purpose about why we're here, even though there's a very different views around it. What I've seen is when non-Indigenous people, or white people specifically, in the work we've done, when we've created a space, or I've been in that space, it's really contested. That there isn't really a sense of what is our shared purpose in this work as non-Indigenous people. Do we have a shared purpose? And what often happens is there's a competition for who's going to authorize or be authorized to actually lead us in this conversation, or so we tend to credentialize a bit. And I think that's coming back to what I said earlier. Increasingly, I'm seeing that there's this real fear of us being able to engage in the ways in which our systems and the work that we're doing is contributing to business as usual. So when we are in those spaces, it's deeply uncomfortable initially, which is, we always see that contrast. Then we come back and, there's a whole regeneration, and we're going, that was really awkward and really uncomfortable. But it's important that we do more of it. And I think that's the thing, is we haven't, as non-Indigenous people, and I'm saying we, but I'm using myself here as well, had enough practice and experience of having to sit in these conversations ourselves and having to work through what is our work. And I think increasingly we're going to be seeing more and more need for that and spaces for that. So we don't get stuck in our trenches, and we don't play the critic card, and we don't play the gatekeeper card to stop us, kissing each other over that edge, because part of it is doing it with compassion as well.
Sure. I was wondering, listening to Liz's explanation and unpacking of that, whether that stuff resonates with you, Mark, particularly from what you see from the other side of the river, or the other side of the trench, however you see the metaphor here. And how does what Liz's description gel with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, I was just smiling because, Liz is talking about kissing over the edge, and we used love hearts before. Maybe there's a big love theme that's coming through in this webinar, I don't know. But I just want to pick up on one of the things you said, Liz, about that sense where, and we've seen it in the work we've done together, where it's like, okay, we're going to ask all non-Indigenous mob, you're going to go to that room there, and all of us First Nations mob, we're going to go to this room. And yeah, the sense we get is that relief. We're like, oh boy, it's hard out there, eh? And we get that moment to rejuvenate. And the shock that I felt when I came back out of that room, and I looked to my fellow, the people I'm working with, and they were like, man, that was really hard. It was tough in there. In that room, it was tough. And it spoke about some of those challenges, but I also wanted to just highlight that it's not about the mistakes that get made, the reason why we get, we're glad we're out of their way or something like that. It's just exhausting being First Nations in the colonial system. It's just an exhausting feeling. And to go into a room, to go into a space, to enter a breakout room online where there's other First Nations people who go, I know how you feel, sis. I know how you feel, Russ. I know how you feel. And yes, that's right. This is, it's just so enlivening. It highlights, and the reason why we chose the title for this webinar, it highlights there's a double meaning with nation building here. This is not just nation building for the nation of Australia. This is nation building for us and our mobs as well, because not all the time when we're in a caucus meeting of our own, you know, we put all the natives in one room, that's not always a pleasant experience, right? Sometimes we get in there and we do to each other like, yeah, you're not from here, you're not from there, you can't speak from this country, what are you wearing that pink shirt for? You know, we will do that to each other. We will do these authorization challenges to each other. So the double meaning of what this webinar is about is trying to create the safety of a conversation space, and almost like the four of us even demonstrating that we've got to go through enough trust building to be honest with each other about what hurts, what makes us happy, what triggers some pain, what makes us feel pride, and how we can have the competing values that we might have, we can work on them for the shared purpose. And if our shared purpose is to have First Nations people come to some clarity on treaty arrangements, and for the rest of Australia to come to clarity on what their positions are through their peak organisations, lobbying bodies, and federal parliaments and state parliaments, etc., that they come to and they say, this is what we want to see, and we've got our own governance and cultural things in our representative bodies saying that, we won't get there if we're not trusting each other to come up with that stuff. And that means our people's trusting each other, but it also means trusting the space that we're trying to create in the middle to have these tough conversations. So absolutely, I resonate with what both Josephine and Liz have said about this tough work on both sides.
I'm just looking at a couple of feedbacks in our conversation. One question was about, are we actually on different edges? Are there different responding to different needs in different situations? You know, is there a non-Indigenous, non-First Nation learning edge that we need to get to that's separate and different, and a First Nations edge that we're trying to work with? And I suppose it comes back to shared purpose again. Dr. Josephine, if I may put the question to you. Liz was talking about coming out of stuckness and same old, same old. Is part of the challenge of getting in stuckness is that we see all of our learning as the same? Is that a common thing? Like, we're all in this together, therefore all our problems must be similar, or are there really different challenges for different groups?
Yeah, thanks, Grant. Yeah, I think there are lots of different challenges for different groups, and some other facts I didn't mention before is, you know, the sheer diversity among First Nations people in Australia. The pattern of colonisation across the continent. So the experiences of colonization across the continent is different. There were different forms. I mean, there's lots of similarities, but there were differences. So for us now, whether we are working in policy or whether we are trying to help people build communities, rebuild communities, I think it's important for us to understand that and appreciate it. So not to say there is way too much mess here. This is too much. There's too much diversity here for us to ever get to the point of being able to collaborate. Probably that is not the point to start at. I mean, I was at a point like that very young in my life, going, this is too hard, especially growing up in Townsville. We have many Aboriginal groups here that aren't from this area. This is the biggest population of Torres Strait Islanders out of the Torres Strait. We have a big population of South Sea Islanders here. So I learned that very young in high school, thinking I was already giving up. I was already going, it's too difficult. It's just too diverse. So once we get to a point where we can appreciate, what does that mean? What does that actually mean? I think it can inform a different way together of us working out how to be in those circumstances. So for example, when we do get stuck or we reach a stalemate in a group setting, perhaps thinking, how do we give people time to go off and do whatever they need to do? And look, I have to say, that's what I did to Liz, Mark and Grant with something we were working on. I left. And I haven't seen Liz in 8 years, actually. So we just talked about that this morning. And I left because I was like, I'm exhausted. I'm so exhausted. I do not want to do this work. And I was working on with a whole lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, setting up the National Congress of Australia's First Peoples at the time. And I thought, oh, there's so much work here. I can't do this work with non-Indigenous people as well as the diverse group of First Nations people that were in that project. And so I made a decision that I had to go. And I like the comments here from Catherine Bannister there, and Annie Stevens mentioned in the chat there. Yeah, knowing when to be still, knowing when to be with yourself or whatever it is to process things is really important. And look, I actually never got used to the uncomfortable feeling. Mark and Grant, I never got used to the uncomfortableness. I couldn't wait till the meetings were over so I could go back and do the work with the First Nations people on this National Congress stuff. And, you know, there was a lot of self-interrogation that was required in that work as well. But I was thinking, I don't want to do this self-interrogation. I'm just going to go over here and do this. And look, even now in hindsight, I think we didn't get deep enough with our self-interrogation as individuals and then as a group. So I think thinking about how do we allow for people to do that work, and it's okay. It's okay. And that doesn't mean you're out. Doesn't mean you're not still contributing to this bigger vision of changing the country or changing your community.
That's some really good points, Josephine. Thank you for that. We've almost reached the edge of our session, but I'm interested in a response from both Mark and Liz. Josephine's talking about the needs to be able to work on our own stuff individually. How does that work out in a collaborative process from your perspective? And as we approach January 26, what is the stuff that needs to happen? Is it singular? Is it or is there one camp over there? Is the other camp over here? And what's the collaborative job that's required across the river? Sorry, I'll just put it out there.
Okay, Liz is doing this. I was trying to stay on mute, Liz, so that you would have final word. Look, I think it is both and. I think this is a profound tension between the care for self. I got to make sure I'm okay. I got to make sure that me, my family, loved ones around me, that we're able to navigate this time, whether it's a challenge or whether it's, you know, I want to be able to express myself. But there is a collective attribute to it as well. There's a collective aspect to it. I would love for the community here, Yagara, Turrbal, on these lands here, to really feel like there can be a day that we can say we are proud to be on this land, on these lands and waters, and we're not taking away from anyone to express that pride, but we're deepening it and enriching it by leaning into our First Nations heritage. And that's me as a visitor to this land on their country. And I guess it's true for me as First Nations as it would be for all the cultural diversity and people's diversity that's here. I think the main thing for me is that just because people are really different to the way I want to be, doesn't mean they're wrong as well. And part of our challenge is to be open enough for the difference in their values and try and figure out, so why are they holding on to their values so strongly? And how can I learn from that in order for us to negotiate a way that we could do this work together?
Thanks, Mark. Liz.
Yeah, and listening to this, I guess I'm thinking about the need to be really clear on where am I best placed to have most impact, and that being, you know, it's a question that I use to ground me around is this the place where I can have most impact, or am I best to do that work in other places? And it can be both. But I think the key thing is around what are the conditions that are in place, either in the collaboration or the organization or in the family where you're trying to have the conversation, both in that system, but also in your own system, that if the conditions aren't in place, if I don't have a strong enough holding environment to hold me in the work that needs to be done in this, then I'm going to come unstuck. And I think part of that is really being aware, and I think particularly those, and I'm deliberately using kind of white Australia as a catch-all, and I know that's highly problematic, but I think those of us who work in mainstream dominant systems, which are constantly influenced by that history of colonization, which is all of us, need to be really examining what is the hidden script that we're coming into this work with, or this conversation with. Like, I've already got an idea in my head about the process that needs to be used, or the outcome, or what the task is. And I think that's really a lot of the challenge here, is how do we come at this work being really conscious of the assumptions we're making, both about who we're working with, where they're at, the conditions that are in place, and the approach that's needed. And, I hear this thrown around a lot and we talk about it a lot, but actually doing that work ourselves before we come to the table and being really clear that, there is an agenda there. We do have a position. None of us are neutral on this. So where am I going to be vulnerable? Where am I going to get caught? Where am I going to get triggered? Is really, really important, because we are navigating this landscape where we are doing it, everything we're in is being informed by colonization. And I think there's layers of that which are revealing itself to us all the time, and I'm saying that as someone who's been in the country only for 20 years. And they're constantly, it's like an onion, it's constantly being revealed of the things that I've taken for granted, that we need to relearn. And I see that same dynamic in the collaborations so yeah, I think that examination of assumptions and our own power is really important.
Thank you, Liz. You've all given us some really important things to focus on. And we've reached the time now where we're calling it a waterfall chat, where we have the opportunity to reflect on what we've heard as a group in this space together. We want to capture some thoughts and feelings as a community here today. And we're going to put 2 questions up, and we're going to invite you to put those responses into the chat. So the first question we want to use for this waterfall chat, when you use it, is what has challenged or inspired you so far? That's the first question I'm going to invite you all to do in your chat group, or your chat box now. In light of all that we've heard around stuckness, patterned behaviour, around colonisation, around the need to care for yourself and to do work with your own mob as well, what has challenged you or inspired you? Can you take some time now? I'm going to invite you to do some reflection and to fill that in. Some people are responding to that need to be personally reflective and engaged in collaboration. Yes, there is a stamina for sitting in the uncomfortable spaces as well. Wow, they're coming in thick and fast now. seems to be a theme about having to sit with discomfort and the challenges with that. Well, that stuff's flying in. You can read along with it too, if you like, and seeing what emerges for you here as well. You might want to see what other people have written and go, yeah, I'm there too. And yeah, there is a resilience required. We might move to the second question while we're there as well. And that one is, what are you still holding? So the stuff that are both challenged by, inspired, but there also might be stuff that you're still carrying with you. I suppose not being good enough there could also be not only a challenge, but something that we carry. We're carrying that dynamic with us. I might be so bold as to suggest in this space, as well as a convener, that we're probably all carrying the scars of colonisation, whether you're First Nation or not. Colonisation and displacement, the fact that there are more than just First Nation peoples here means somebody got displaced and brought here. Embracing discomfort, being vulnerable, resilience and commitment through time are some of the themes that are coming up for us. Yeah, it's a nice reminder that colonisation is a global thing. It's not just something that we have here in Australia, but it's something that has gone around the globe. It's not just the British that have done this either. So folks, these chats will be summarised for our learning in the webinar, and will be shared with it. This is some great content here. It's some real gems that people are sharing. Now, your names won't be attributed to any of this stuff, so we want to keep this a safe learning space, but we also want to give you the opportunity to see back some of the things you've shared and some of the learnings that we've landed at today. So we might move to our next space here in our time together. And I'd like to hear from our panelists about what they're seeing emerging from these chats, and what they make of the thoughts and feelings of our co-travelers this morning as they log in and see with how we're feeling.
Thanks. I might lead out. I just want to pick up two kind of topics or areas. And one is around the enormity of the task. Wow, this is so much bigger. It feels huge. It feels, we get that point where it's like, so the change we're trying to make is actually, it feels monumental. And in that space, what we know with social change is that we actually need levels of disruption to create the kind of change we need, the shift that we need. And we need, it's a great platform for incrementalism. We need those little nudges, those little shifts to happen. And part of the reaction response I have to the enormity of the task, I asked my mum in preparation for coming to this, our mum, Grant, I asked her mum what her thoughts were on January 26th. And she talked about how growing up on Cherbourg Mission here in Southeast Queensland, how she can remember the dominant conversation was, it's bad, and it's not to be celebrated. It's something that's not about us. Any national day, anything that was celebrating the colonial structures that were oppressing the people in Cherbourg, they're like, yeah, we don't want to celebrate that. So it was kind of drummed in as a value. And it just reminded me of how long it takes to do the kind of shifting that we need. So yes, it's huge. Yes, it's a really big task. But if you can see the lens of 20 years back and 20 years forward, for example, in 20 years back, the kind of conversation that we had about these topics and where we want to be in 20 years' time. And I used last year in our webinar the conversation about the current dialogue at the state-based level with the Victorian treaty conversations. So you got the Assembly of First Peoples in Victoria, and you've got the state government in seeking to engage with each other around what this means for us to have a treaty in that locality. 20 years ago, that conversation, is not as advanced as what it is now. But in 20 years' time, we want it to be far more advanced. We want it to be with things in place. So I want to encourage people that even though it feels like it's an enormous task, that yes, we have the opportunity to make our incremental disruptions for the kind of shift that we want to make, the kind of shift that we want to see. And we have to hold much more of a generational view on those shifts coming to life. Thanks.
For sure. Josephine, were there anything in those chat responses that resonated for you?
Wow, all of it, Grant, all of it. Thank you, everyone. That's incredibly, it's just fantastic reading this stuff. How much time do I have? Not much, hey? So I think Elise Barkley, what you said there, when you get overwhelmed and, in those moments you think where your power is looking at your own or dealing with your own maybe ideas, racist thoughts or beliefs, or maybe there's prejudice there or whatever. Like that's really powerful. That's the same for me, like when I'm overwhelmed, I have to ask myself, where's the most power that I have right now? And it's with yourself. And what do I have to work on? What do I have to work on in here? What kind of thinking is immobilizing me at the moment? So yeah, that was very powerful. Yeah, I don't know. There was too much, Grant. There's too many amazing questions and statements in there. I think the other thing that people brought up, like, about that energy to hold a space, kind of thing. And I think Liz kind of spoke before about that idea of, you having something that holds you as well, whether that's family and friends or a group of peers or whoever those people are, like you have in your own personal kind of holding space to be able to contribute to holding a space with others. But yeah, I'll just say that for now, because there's just so much there. Thank you everyone for your generosity.
Just to answer the question that just popped into the chat there will be an opportunity to see all of the responses and all of the collective wisdom. It'll be shared from CFI and without individual attribution to who said what. But the content, the wisdom will be accessible, as well as a recording of this conversation. Liz, you have I want to hand to you.
There's a strong theme through the comments there around holding discomfort and how we sit in our own discomfort or hold others in the discomfort that this conversation generates. And what we see in the work we do is that actually that, you know, someone said previously, it is a skill. And I think I just want to really, really go into that it is a skill that we all can learn. Now, some of us are doing it every day far more than others. I'm also struck by choice. There's a theme about choice in there, that as non-Indigenous people, we have a choice about whether we engage in this conversation or not, or in the work or not, which that is a massive privilege that we have. And I think that, to me, that's the work that we're trying to shift, is really seeing, it's something we haven't talked about today much, but it's been underneath everything we've said, which is about, this is really this navigation of power, of working with far more awareness of the power that we have in different contexts and the discomfort that that power brings. Certainly as a white person in Australia with access to formal power, informal power, it's deeply uncomfortable when you haven't earned it. And I think that that really is the work that we're working on, building that muscle, because it is a muscle we can build to lean into and go, you know, much of the work that the four of us have done in the past and ongoing, it has been around, you know, for myself being, say, a white facilitator in a leadership program, feeling like I have very little power, but being perceived by others as going, what are you doing? You've convened us here, you're here doing this work, and you're behaving as if you don't have any agency, and it's infuriating to others. So I think we want to be bridging the gap between how I feel about my own power, how other people perceive that, and how I then use it. Because if I act as if I don't have any power, then I'm either going to overuse it, abuse it, or I'm going to neglect it. And I think this is the dance we're in all the time, that we can often feel powerless in this conversation when we've come up against discomfort or disagreement. So I just want to bring that out, because I think that is stuff we learn and we can continue learning, but it's a dirty word in Australia. We don't talk about power because we're really uncomfortable with it. And, you know, being from Scotland as well, we carry that same thing around power, yet we have it. We're having a conversation here today about it. So I think it's just tapping into the agency that people have and exploring the edges of that, of how can I get more comfortable with what I've got so I can use that on behalf of making change.
Wow, powerful stuff, Liz. Thank you so much. So we've come to another waterfall moment, a waterfall chat. And at this particular area, we call it the so what factor. I was wondering if we could go to our next, is there a slide that goes with this next? Thank you, Paroma. So the so what factor for us here will be, what, if anything, will you do differently on your on January 26th as a result of this conversation? Where the rubber hits the road is okay, we've gone down some big topics, big conceptual ideas. How do we ground it as a community of people wanting good change? How do we ground it going forward on the 26th? I'm going to invite you to respond by putting that in a chat conversation now. Take it, not all of you will be inviting me around for lamb on the barbie. So what will you be doing differently? Some people listening to elders, to read, to learn, to listen to First Nation people. Yeah. That's a big challenge, is to go out and find people when you really want to run away and hide. Because part of me will probably want to do that. Find a nice beach and stay away from people if I can. Wow, and now you're coming in thick and fast, faster than I can read. Reflecting on power. So are you guys reading this in real time with me as well? Some good stuff here. Wow. This feedback here again will be shared as part of the chats around this day, will be shared with all of you guys as well. Just in case you've seen a good idea there and it's just flipped past your screen thinking, oh, I wanted to see what they said. You'll have access to that as well. Reflecting on power. Look, folks, feel free to allow those contributions to keep happening. I'm going to, as we come close to the end of our time together, I'm going to come to our panelists and ask them to for a very brief final words. If there are any brief reflections that our panelists would like to give.
Okay, because I went first last time, I'm going to refrain this time. Rama, we might just get the shared screen down.
I'm happy just to make a comment, Grant, just about not necessarily what's being shared here, which is fantastic, but just some stuff that then came into my mind from the last waterfall moment. Somebody asked, I'd like to know, what First Nations people want in a treaty. And I guess what I want to say, being involved in the Queensland process, is that's a ways off yet. There's a lot of work to be done, particularly when we talk about Indigenous nation building, which is a rebuilding of our processes and maybe, negotiating new ways of doing things around leadership and governance. So that's still a ways off. We're not wanting to rush in to a process here in Queensland. So that is a good question and we all want to know. And so there's lots of, often when we want to do this work, we've got to create, again, vehicles and mechanisms that will support the way Indigenous people have to have dialogue and come to decisions. So there's still that work that has to be done first. And there's just one other comment, which was about somebody was saying that their friends or their colleagues or people that they know, once they say, well, colonization is a natural part of evolution or progression or whatever, and then they say that the person said it's like it absolves non-Indigenous people from that. I would say, because this comes up brought up by my students as well at UQ, it's that, that's the initial kind of realization, okay, I can't be held accountable for what these people did, whether they're my ancestors or not, before. But then the next stage is, but again, bring back to yourself, what do I need to change not to perpetuate that? So I guess if people do say that to you, look, it's not my business. It's you can't blame me for colonization. The next question is, yeah, but what do you want to do now in your life while you're here to address these social justice issues? Whether it's you want to do it systemically or whether you want to do it another way. There's so much more I want to say, but I won't. I'll just say that now. Thank you.
Thank you, Josephine.
I might just build on that, Josephine. And just one of the themes that came in earlier around how can we be having these conversations, not just in the lead up to January the 26th, but actually what's our roles individually and collectively in being able to keep the heat on this conversation. I think there's particularly for non-Indigenous Australians to be, I guess, seeing I think once we accept that we are all influenced by the white viewpoint being at the center of everything that we do, then it's kind of freeing to be able to then see how, not if, I'm contributing to it or not. And I think we want to be stopping those racist patterns continuing rather than, being able to defend ourselves that we are not part of it. So I think that we're increasingly going to be seeing this work needing to be done, both in the questions we ask and the collaborations we're in, to be asking how does colonization, how's that impacting on what's happening here today? Because often it's not talked about. And asking it of ourselves. So to me, that means leaning into that discomfort that will bring and having allies to be able to do that with and being able to create the conditions to do that work is really, I think, what we're going to see more of this year. So really look forward to joining with many of you on this call to do that work together.
Thanks, Liz. Folks, we've come to the end of our, coming close to the end of our time together. And we're going to, I'm going to hand back to Virginia and Mark, but what we'd like you to do while they're sort of closing off our time together, I want to invite everybody to contribute one word that describes how you're feeling right now. This is not just an intellectual exercise. This is also an emotional exercise because we are people. Wow, the responses are quick and fast. So as you are contributing your single word answers, I'm going to hand it over now to Mark and Virginia to wrap up our time. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Grant. On behalf of CFI, I would like to say a very special thanks to you for being our convener today. You held the conversation just beautifully. To Josephine, Bourne, Mark Yettica-Paulson and Liz Skelton, your insights and wisdom both challenged and inspired me, and I'm sure others here as well. I'd like to thank those members of the CFI team and network for the behind the scenes work you've been doing today to make it go so smoothly. And of course to you, our participants, for prioritising today, for being here, for your engagement and participation and the ongoing work that you will be doing in this space. Before we close, I want to ask Mark to share a bit more information about the journey ahead for those who are interested around deep collaboration.
Yeah, thanks, Virginia. And if I was to put a one word in response, it would be gratitude as well. We try to create spaces like this where we can have conversations that have been eluding us, we've not been able to get to it. And today's been a great example of, if you create the time and space, then you can get sharp and pointy as well as soft and fluffy conversations in the whole mix. So I really appreciate the input and for the way that people have conducted themselves today. The next kind of steps, if people are interested in doing more, there's a whole learning program that Collaboration for Impact have, and there are two components of that learning program specifically on deep collaboration. We've got a fundamentals, foundational kind of program, which is 2 days in June. Details are on our website. And I'm sure that we can also share that link in the chat as well. And we also have a 6-day program later in the year called the Intensive Program for those who want to learn how to lead others in a conversation space like this. But the kind of opportunity we have in 2022, knowing that there's going to be, say, perhaps an election called for, we know it's going to amplify a lot of these issues. But I was also reminded very recently that it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to promote the dialogue and shift the language that's used. So from me, thank you so much for all of your willingness to participate. And if you want to go further with this, then Collaboration for Impact has the opportunity through its learning programs to help facilitate that as well. Thanks, Virginia.
Thank you, Mark. We're just on time, so please do go ahead and have a look at the Systems Change Learning Program. There's some really fantastic other offerings available beyond deep collaboration for those who are leading in this space, as well as for those who are new to this space. So please take a look at that. So let me just hand over to Grant to close. Thank you.
So thanks everybody for traveling with us today. What do they say on Blues Brothers? You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Travel safely into January 26th and go well into the next space.
Thank you, everyone.